Okay, so now let's look at three economic systems. We're going to look at the three major economic systems that people argue and talk about all the time. And the first one we're going to talk about is called capitalism. Capitalism is this economic system based on private ownership and having the means of production with the goal of making a profit. The government takes a laissez faire or hands off approach to the economy. Laissez faire is French for hands off or let be. So the government doesn't get involved, it keeps their hands off of businesses and the economy. So a truly capitalist society, basically what the rule is supply and demand. So if people want stuff, the price goes up. If people don't want stuff, the price goes down. So that's your demand. If the supply is high, it's probably cheap. If something has a low supply, like let's think about what's the rarest thing in the world, and that is yellow diamonds. So yellow diamonds are the rarest thing in the world. So what is the value of our yellow diamond? Well, they're extremely expensive, okay? In terms of capitalism, because of the law of supply and demand, yellow diamonds will have a very high price. What's the most, probably the thing that's out there the most, or it's around us? It has almost no value. Maybe something like that we take for granted, like water. Water is everywhere. We can all get water, so water is relatively cheap, or it's present, omnipresent, present most places. However, that's how the economic system is supposed to work. But in reality, the way it should work would be what's the most valuable thing to us? What has true value to us? And the answer is probably water and food have the highest value to us. And while diamonds, and especially yellow diamonds, have probably no value to me at all. I could live my whole life without a yellow diamond, and I'm sure I will. So it doesn't really have much of a value. But since it's so rare, it increases demand because there's enough people that want yellow diamonds that it makes it really expensive. And this is what's going to rule the economy. Who wants what and what's out there and who gets it. Now, some things that have to exist in capitalism is, first of all, you have to have private ownership of property. So whoever owns property is going to be the capitalist. And they're probably the more property you own, and that's how the system had worked for years, is going to be the wealthiest people. So in capitalism, if you own a lot of land, like our founding fathers or the Roman Republic, land was the wealthy landowners are the ones that could vote, or they were in the Senate. And in capitalism today, land is still very valuable, but also things like technology or intellectual property are probably worth even more. Information is probably much more valuable today than land. You'd probably be richer if you had the information to build a new iPhone than if you had 100 acres or 200 acres of land, because that's something you could sell and you get more money, and then you could buy as much land as you can afford. So capitalism is based on the rule of supply and demand. Now, with the government staying out of the economy, I want you guys to think about what could be some issues with capitalism. Well, first of all, the capitalists, the people that own the land and the property and the means of production, the things that make things, like the people that actually own the coal to make electricity, or they own the waterways so we can't get to it to drink water out of the river, or they own part of the river, they could possibly abuse those powers, right? They could charge whatever prices they want on certain things because we have to have water, we have to have food. So in a truly capitalist society, it might cost $50 for a loaf of bread. And are you willing to pay it? Probably so, if you need to eat and you're hungry. So if the government stays completely out of the economy, that might cause some issues too. And who runs the economy in a capitalist society would be, again, the wealthiest capitalists. So Jeff Bezos, I think he's the richest man in the world right now, or Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook. These guys are super wealthy, and they own telecommunications and computer systems, and they own the means of production, the things that everybody wants now. Everybody needs a cell phone now. Or maybe not as concerned with other things, but cell phones are a must-have. And by the government not stepping in, these guys could keep charging price after price after price after price. And in a free market, laissez-faire system, that's how it works. Now we're going to look at some other systems. So let's look at another economic system, which a lot of people might say it's kind of the opposite of capitalism. This is socialism. Socialism is this idea that there is a central government that controls production, distribution of goods, services, and labor in the nation. The goal is to promote an equitable distribution of resources among the people. So, in a socialist society, the government, and again, economic systems are not the same thing as form of government. So you can have a direct democracy that is a capitalist free market system. You could also have a direct democracy that is a socialist system. You could have a dictator in charge of a capitalist system. For example, Adolf Hitler was in charge of a capitalist society, and he was a dictator. And if you're in the Nazi Party, those capitalists made lots of money, where everybody else was in trouble. But also, you could have a dictator in charge of a socialist society. You could have Stalin in Russia, who was in control of things, or an oligarchy, which is a few ruling a socialist society, and so forth and so on. Like China claims to be socialist, which is not completely true either. But the idea in a socialist society is that the government owns all the means of production, and they distribute things out pretty equitably, so everybody gets a chance. So some things, instead of maybe like what becomes really valuable to people, would maybe not be stuff, but maybe time. So if doctors get as much stuff as, for example, a garbage man, what they would trade off is time. So maybe a surgeon only works 4 hours a day. Meanwhile, a garbage man would have to work 8 or 10 hours a day. So they might work less because they had to do more to get to that level, something like that. But everybody at the end of the day in a socialist society is supposed to have food and water and a place to live, for transportation. You'd have public transit, stuff like that, if it was a truly socialist society. So what we find out is most societies in the world are not capitalist or socialist. They're a combination of both, and we call that a mixed economy. So if somebody says, oh, America is a free market capitalist society, that is not completely true. We do have some free market things, but the government does regulate, and the government does have to step in on certain things. And there has to be some laws to make it equitable, because we found out in capitalism, if you guys remember the Gilded Age, where, gilded meaning kind of gold, it looks good on the outside, but it's rotten on the inside. You can remember what happened is when you had really pretty free market capitalism, what happened is the Andrew Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller and these super rich people, they took over the country. And essentially, the government had no power in America. In fact, in World War I, the president, Woodrow Wilson, had to actually go to J.P. Morgan, which is now a bank called J.P. Morgan Chase, and literally ask the guy if he could borrow money to go to war in World War I, because the government had no money back then. That's how free the economy was in economics. But also, in that society at the time, people didn't have things like minimum wage. They didn't have fair labor laws. We just celebrated like Labor Day. They didn't have weekends off. They didn't get paid overtime if they worked over 36 to 40 hours a week. And they didn't have a lot of laws to protect the labor if they were abused. Now, on the reverse side of it, we think of people as say, oh, the communists, or you think of socialist society, you're talking about like China thinks they're socialists. Well, are they? They provide some services for the people, like they have free health care and stuff like that. But at the same time, they're capitalists. They do have capitalists that make lots of money. And there's companies that make lots and lots of money in China that sell us products. It's not the government that runs all the businesses there. But some things that are socialized in many countries are things like oil. So if you're a socialist, you'd be like, well, how can you own oil? Who gets to own the oil in the ground? Well, somebody bought the land, is what a capitalist would say. Well, then a socialist might come back and say, well, what gives you a right to buy land? Like, how do you own land in the first place is one of the fundamental questions. Like, how do you own something? Well, money, of course. Well, how did you get the land originally? Because, for example, in America, you had the colonists and the European Americans just kind of took the land from the indigenous Americans and said it was their land. And then they passed it down to their ancestors and their nephews and their sons and grandsons. Is that really how you should own something? And these are fundamental questions in the economic system. So again, Capitalism is free market. The government's not supposed to do anything. Just stay out of everything. Let it happen. Let it be. Laissez-faire. Socialism is the government is controlling the distribution, the means of all goods, and they try to be somewhat equitable in their distribution. So you don't have super wealthy or super rich or super poor people. Uh, Now, in Europe, you have countries that are probably much more, they're mixed economies like America, but they tend to be more socialist than capitalist. So, for example, like Sweden. Well, in Sweden, everybody has a child gets paid uh, the equivalent to like $400 a month per kid. They just get $400 every month to help take care of their child. That's a very socialist idea that we'd use money or resources to help take care of it. We have socialist systems in America, socialist institutions. I want you to think, what are some socialist institutions? What are some institutions that we own in America under the government that everybody could use freely? Now, some of those systems are the library, for example. Everybody could use libraries in America. It's a great resource. Everybody has access to knowledge. You don't need me. You could go to the library and read about socialism on your own and learn about anything that interests you. Free. You just need a library card, and that's as free as it gets. What about public school? Public school is not completely socialist in America. It's socialist in the sense that everybody gets free public school in America. However, we'll find out that is it equitable? And we don't have socialized education, meaning all the schools are equitable. Some schools have lots of money and lots of resources because it's based on the taxes of people that live in their neighborhood. And some schools don't have much money at all because it's based on the taxes in their neighborhood if their neighborhood's poor. But that's where the federal government in a socialist society would step in, and it does in America to some degree, and they give more money to the poorer schools to help them to be successful. So we have many socialist institutions, fire department, police, law enforcement. Those are socialist institutions. The government owns them to protect the goodness of the whole. In a private system and capitalist system, how would that work? Well, if it was truly capitalist, you'd have to hire your own police. You'd have to hire security. You'd have to pay the fire department to take care of things. And there would be no libraries. You'd have to pay to use books or the internet. Everything would not be shared for the betterment of the community. So socialism is supposed to be that the government owns these things so everybody is successful and you have equal distribution. Capitalism, it's based on supply and demand and who gets the money and who is going to move up or not and own things. Now, at the end, the last system we have is called communism. And communism is a system where the state or the government controls all economic activity in the nation. The state rejects free enterprise. You can't own anything. Socialism, that's not true. You could own there is some free ownership of things. And capitalism is eliminated. Private ownership is discouraged and often prohibited. It can be actually against the law. And in theory, communists believe that the country should not have social classes or money. So in a true communist society, you don't even need money because you would just get on the train. So while France might be more socialist than America, and they have really good public transit and I can get everywhere, it still costs money to get on the train and to get places. In a true communist society, you wouldn't need any money. You would just get on the train and get on the subway or the metro and you go any place you want and you wouldn't have to pay for it. Now, you would have to work, but you would work for the people, the government, and everybody works for the government. And it's an interesting idea is communism. Many believe that if you had a true communist society, it would kind of be like a utopia. And utopia is a perfect society. So we think of like Star Trek, where they're surpass money. They don't even need money because all their needs are met. They have all the food and clothes they want and entertainment. And they just want time to spend and enjoy with each other, and to be spiritual. So you can see on the bottom you have capitalism is corporate, privately owned property. Communism is publicly owned property, and you could see, but they're both political and economic theories. Capitalists believe in a free, laissez-faire market or free market society. Communists believe in economic equality. Consumer choice is on the capitalist side. Consumers choose supply and demand. And on the communism side, you equal distribution of production based on need. So those that need food, they'll give them food. And if you have enough food, they don't give you more food. That is how communism will work. Different. The father of communism's name was Karl Marx. And Karl Marx is the father of communism. And he believed that what's going to happen is someday in communism, there's going to be a world revolution where people are going to be getting tired of paying and having no money. And the capitalists, the very wealthy people, owning most of everything. So, like, he would attack, for example, in America, the wealthiest 5% of Americans own something like 40% of America. Almost half of America is owned by just 5% of America. So the rest of us, the rest of the 95% of Americans are fighting over the other half of America. And he says people are going to get tired of this because it's going to become so unequal. And there's going to be so many poor and so few rich that they're going to have a revolution, a communist revolution. And they're going to kill or overthrow the wealthy people, and they're going to establish communism and equal society. What's interesting is many African Americans were attracted to communism, and maybe still are. W. Du Bois, the father, NAACP. Many communists have been intellectual people of color that argue that these are good ideas, that socialism and communism aren't bad ideas, where there is no poor, there are no wealthy, everybody has what they need. And that probably makes sense, especially if you're a person of color, because white people tend to benefit or do better in these systems than people of color in our system. But in a capitalist system, it could work the other way. You could have people of European ancestry in a country that's predominantly people of color, and maybe they would mistreat them. But in communism, everybody's equal. Women are equal too. So we have equal access to jobs and work. In a capitalist society, it's whoever wants to hire whoever they want to hire. So if they only want to hire men, okay, it's not the government's business. So again, just to remind you, in America and most countries, we have a combination of communism or socialism and capitalism. We don't really have true capitalism in America. We don't really have socialism in America. Some things are socialized, like law enforcement, education, to some degree. But one thing that's not is healthcare. Most countries have socialized medicine. They have free healthcare for everybody in their country. In America, we do not. We tend to be a little bit more on the capitalist side, where you have to pay for healthcare, and if you couldn't afford it, you might not have healthcare. And that's kind of picked up where the government stepped in and tried to help make it more affordable for people, but they still have to pay for it. So these are the economic systems we're going to talk about all year.